it's Gabrielle from Be Wise Gardens, and we want to talk about early spring and just like frost dates and things you can do in the early spring and things that you shouldn't do in the early spring. A lot of people will experience a lot of warm days, but they don't experience how cold it gets at night. And so they just think, oh my gosh, it's 50 degrees, it's 60 degrees. I mean, we even had a day that was almost 70. And so you get all excited and you plant things, or you think that like the early blooming of things is like, yay, I'm gonna get stuff early. But then if we have too many nights or nights that drop enough below 32 that it freezes those brand new blooms or those brand new buds, then they usually are like ruined for the season. And the only things that can kind of withstand that are the things that are called cold hardy. And there's either cold hardy like crops that you can sow, or there's cold hardy things that get started really early. And those things are usually like chives and let's see what else, like all of your herbs will get started that have been in the ground, not the tender ones of course, like basil and that kind of thing, but like oregano is starting to sprout and parsley has started to sprout. And then like with flowers, it's like peonies and tulips and hyacinth and daffodils and all of those things. My earring keeps getting stuck. Are cold hardy. And so that's why they can come up and you see these beautiful blooms and these really green shoots like this chives right here. Is you're thinking, oh, well, it must be spring. Look at this stuff is growing and it's thriving, yet it doesn't freeze the same. And then there's some blooms over there with little bulbs that were planted last season, but that doesn't mean that you can plant your tomatoes and peppers, and most nurseries will not sell you those things anyway until they can be planted outside. But if you were the person that started your seeds early and you're super excited and then you go to plant them, they won't survive the cold temperatures that we still have. Like you can even still see my breath this morning that it's that chilly outside. But there are some things that you can do in the early spring. You can get things, start minimally cleaning things up. So you can see that this bed was cleaned up when she just panned across it. And this was echinacea. And what we did is we trimmed these down to where there's still some sticks left. So it isn't the cleanest that it could be. There's also some leaf litter because we don't know that there isn't butterflies cocooned in there or different other types of pollinators and creatures that live in leaf litter. And so I left all of that leaf litter there. And then what happens is that the plants, which you can see them sprouting right there, the plants will come up and all these sticks will get completely covered by the new foliage. The things that we left over here, we had planted a bunch of milkweed, which is really good for the monarch butterfly. And we didn't see any last year. And there's some debate on whether or not we really should be planting that. Does it change their habits and that kind of thing? But you can read about that science on your own. We planted it because we like the flower. And if we could help, we would. But if that, you see this area over here, because it was attracting more butterflies, even the swallowtails, I didn't clean it up at all. And so I've left this because a lot of these stems are hollow. And there's different kinds of plants. And I'm going to well, I actually have some nice little pruners in my pocket. No, yay, caught. When you cut these, they're essentially hollow. And so a tiny pollinator, a solitary bee, a solitary fly or wasp will burrow into this somewhere, or if they find a natural hole from a little branch that fell off, they can actually hibernate in these all winter long, much like the little bee hotels that they sell at garden centers and whatever with the, bamboo straws or whatever in them. This is their natural way of finding a straw or a way to hibernate over winter where they're safe. And they can live out the winter, and then actually the bee or the wasp, they lay their egg in there, and it's not the actual original parent that lives, but the larvae become the next generation. And so we want to leave this stuff, and even though it looks messy and even though it's not my like super tidy ideal garden right now, I do want the pollinators to have a safe place to overwinter. And so I'm going to leave all of this because they will hatch sometime in April. Now, if you really are gung-ho and you just want to get this cleaned up, take all of this debris and set it somewhere where it can just wait out until you don't throw it away right away. Don't stuff it in the bags that go to the city compost. Just set it to the side, by your garage, or, by an area where they can chew their way out and survive. We did not do that with every single thing. We tried, we have a huge compost pile, and we kind of laid everything strategically in the compost pile so that those things can hatch and come out in the spring. Other things, like a lot of the leaves, because we just have so many leaves, we did put in bags. You can't feel guilty. There's so many pollinators. Don't, be too hard on yourself, because, ultimately it's your yard. You get to make choices about your yard. And but so then those are the kind of things that you're going to start doing. Another thing that's really exciting that you can do, like with this yarrow, is it starts to mature. This is going into season 4 for this plant, and it needs to be divided. It needs to be dug up. All these fresh little starts. I don't want this much yarrow in this place, because then those will also come up, spread seeds or spread rhizomes, and come up more and more and more. So I want to bring this back to where this ring is. And these you can give away. Put them in little 4-inch pots, give them to people. This is a white yarrow. That's more of the natural variety, as opposed to the really colorful ones. And now is the time. And otherwise you have to wait till fall. If you don't divide things basically right now, then you'll just put them under stress, because it'll be too warm, or they're not in their like really rigorous growing phase once they start blooming and that kind of thing. And that's the same goes for anything else. Like this, what was this called? That one that I planted? Sorba. I planted one little Sorba 4-inch pot, and it seeded like crazy. So I feel like I'm constantly managing it. You can see that it's worked its way into the garlic. There's lots of plants that you're like, oops, I love that plant, but I didn't realize that it was going to become its own meadow, right? Another plant that spreads very vigorously is violets. And those are usually, people think of those as kind of like a senior plant, or, those are in the grass and in the fields of England, and, that kind of thing. And they are, and they spread unbelievably. Like this entire bed is becoming violets, which it is a very beautiful ground cover, but it is a little bit too vigorous in some ways. So with this, the way I'm going to handle this bed right here, there isn't anything else in here because it kind of choked everything else out. And so I'm going to recover this with cardboard again. I'm going to scrape all these rocks to the side, and I'm going to, so that I can keep the rocks, and I'm going to recover this little wedge of soil with cardboard and put soil back on top of it, put my mulch back in place to control them. I'm not going to be able to eradicate them. I don't want to kill all of them. I just don't want them to just keep moving through this bed until that's all it is violets. Another thing that is moved into this bed is grass. And you can see that there's so much grass in here. And so that will also be being mulched with sheet mulched with cardboard. The things that are plants that are still in here, which if I get in here, there's some things that are coming through, and it looks like it's a hardy geranium there and a hardy geranium there. This is garlic. I will dig those up, because this is the time to do it, and so that then I can just replant them. If we keep going this way, another thing that we did is we had right here in this little bare spot, we had a huge pot of horseradish, and it wasn't a very pretty plant, and this is kind of an entrance to the yard, but I don't want to get rid of the horseradish, so we moved the pot, and when we moved the pot, we realized these are all actual roots for horseradish. And you can see that this root is now sprouting, and it will become horseradish here. So even though I moved it, and it literally made its way out of the tiny little holes in the bottom of the pot. And that's just like the cycle of life. That's how life, it will survive, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig those out and put a different pot there with some flowers or some herbs in it. Something that pollinators are like. I'm sure that, actually the horseradish, it did bloom, but it's like kind of a scraggly brassica kind of flower. So then if we went through here, we did clean this mostly up. And mostly because there was a whole bunch of wildflower seeds that were in here, and you can see all the little speckles of green Those are actual flower seeds, and I wanted them to have their best chance. So I did want to get the debris off of it so that they didn't get just kind of lost in the mix of all of that. I wanted to see what was there, because what I'm going to do is I don't want every single one of these flowers. There's a lot of California poppy, and I can't even remember, but it was a really beautiful mix of wildflowers. But last year I kind of just let them go wild, and there was too many of them, and so they were just crammed in here, and they needed a little bit more space to be as pretty as they could. So I'm going to edit that a little bit. Over here is our peony patch, and so the peonies are going down this side and down this side. And the thing I want to talk about with peonies is that they're just emerging right now, and that's one of the first like wonderful signs of spring, because you're so excited about the cut flowers that you're going to get. The thing to remember about peonies is that they can't be planted too deep, and as the years go by and you keep adding mulch to your garden, they actually do get deeper because you're adding, you know, material on top. So at the end of this season, I'm actually going to dig up the peonies that didn't bloom. That's how that's one of the ways that you know that they're buried a little bit too deep. And so the ones I'm going to make note this May, when they start blooming, and realize, okay, that one needs to be dug and lifted, that one needs to be dug and lifted. And if I want to divide them to spread them out a little bit, that's what I'm going to do. And the fun part about peonies, this one's a really pretty shoot. It almost looks like a little alien. And the thing to remember is that the first shoots that come through, these are the ones with the flowers. So if you are working around your peonies, you want to be very careful, because if you break these off, you're not going to get flowers. Anything that comes up later will just be foliage. And so be really careful when you're working with your peonies. And we also, with those, we leave a little bit of a stick because it helps bring them up and support them. I also put supports. Each peony has this kind of a little wire support, because they get so heavy that then they fall into the yard, and then they're not as pretty. And this year in this peony strip, I mixed seeds, poppy seeds that bloom later, so that when these are spent and it's just kind of a little bit of the foliage, there will be poppies in here as well growing. And that's how you plant for successive blooming. Just look at your bloom dates on the packet or on the plant tag, and plant things that bloom in May, bloom in June, bloom in July, not very many things bloom in August, but there are a few things. And you can then get this really beautiful perennial beds by successive blooming, paying attention to dates. So we're going to go to the greenhouse now, and we're going to talk about what you can start with, either plant lights in your house, or if you have a tiny greenhouse, or if there's somebody that you know that has a greenhouse, that you could have a space in their greenhouse. And our bees have woken up and they've started eating, so we're feeding the bees with their sugar water. One fun project this summer is going to be building a new greenhouse, because this one has seen its day. We've got lots of good heat in here. Isabel's going to close the door. We do heat our greenhouse because otherwise we would only be able to start cold crops in here. And we just use a little propane heater that is specifically for greenhouses. And it has a blue flame, and the blue flame heats the air rather than the objects, or the opposite. I can't remember, but either the red flame is for heating the air, and the blue flame is for heating the objects, or whatever. But one specifically, if you're going to get something like that, says it's for greenhouses. Don't get the one that's for your house. So basically what we've got started in here is dahlias that refuse to stay dormant. Usually we wouldn't plant them this early, but they started growing out of their boxes. So it was like, okay, I guess you want to grow. So we planted those. And then we're letting one of our neighbors share the greenhouse, and she wanted to start a whole bunch of flowers for her own garden. And so she brought over seeds, and we started these all in the house. And once they germinated and were, had started to get their first set of leaves, then we brought them out to the greenhouse, because they're perfectly fine in here. We did need to bring one set back in because it was too cold, even with the heater on. And so that one's sitting on the heat mat. And these are the geraniums that we overwintered. This is an experiment I've never done before. I did it according to a YouTube video. We'll see if that works. They seem way too dry to me, but I may have done something wrong. And then over here is things that we're starting from seed. And these are poppies, and it looks like they have germinated. Oh, yay, look. And it's a gray poppy. So we're going to take the lid off now that it's germinated and let those grow. I'm so excited. And we have some fragrant lilies, and I have some lily of the valley, and these are like little, what is it? They're not bulbs. I guess it's rootstock. Yeah, it's just rootstock. And then this is really exciting for me because last year I harvested canna lily seeds from just some cheap Home Depot canna lilies that I got. And this was a false yucca that also got seeds and had this really beautiful pod. And all of these are started from those seeds. There's a very specific thing you do when you do the canna lily, not calla lily, but canna lily seeds. You have to score it with a little saw blade. You have to soak them until they start to emerge, and then you stick them in the soil. And I'm just so excited at their progress. Like these are like little miniature canna lilies. I'm so excited. It's amazing when you start things from seed, just how like you feel like you have some sense of power, you know, because I can create life. It's so fun. And then this strip is our peppers and eggplant and celery. And there's a couple of flowers in here. And then these are all zinnias and different flowers. And then over here is back to our neighbor's things. And she started some peas and some different flowers. And then another one of our exciting discoveries is with hydrangeas. So hydrangeas, I guess you can well, they obviously did work. We did two different ways. We just cut literally a section of hydrangea, took all the leaves except for some top ones, trimmed those leaves, and stuck them in jars of water. We also did the same thing outside, and the theory was that you could just stick them right in the ground and that they'll become hydrangea bushes. And I was just like, really? That just seems way too easy. It absolutely worked. It worked just as well as sticking them in a jar and waiting for roots, which took forever. Now the ones that we rooted like this, because they were in the house, they of course have leaves. They look more robust than the ones outside, but the ones outside do have roots. And so that's a pretty amazing and inexpensive way to get what's relatively inexpensive shrub. Now, of course, it's going to take several years for it to be a piece of your landscape because it's, you know, this big right now. And obviously that's what you're paying for when you buy them from a nursery, is that somebody has, you know, went step by step through the process to get a big shrub. And so that's what we're up to in the greenhouse. It's pretty exciting. It's kind of getting toasty in here. So out here, an exciting thing that's happened over the course of the last several years is our strawberry patch has really grown, and which I'm excited about. And for some reason, I'm gonna knock on wood, cross my fingers, pray, do a whole bunch of stuff, that the squirrels have never found them. Even though we have lots of squirrels, we get most of the strawberries. So that's pretty exciting. And we have several different varieties through here. And because it's a stolon, right? The shoot that they send out that starts a new strawberry. So this was the mother plant. It sends out what looks like a little root thing, and it starts a new thing, and that's called a stolon. I always want to call them rhizomes, but that's under the ground, what grass does. And so anyway, these are super healthy. This is how you divide them. Like, I've never dug up the strawberry plant and chopped it in half and done it that way. I've always just taken these little shoots and replanted them. So you can see over there, those strawberries are in the little edge. So I will dig those up and move them to the center, so that they don't get stepped on, they don't get hit by the weed whacker. And so then as you see, you come through, you can see that the parsley has reseeded and it's coming up. And then last year, I found these little platforms that go around the strawberry, and the flower shoot comes up. Oh, it's already getting some. The flower shoot comes up and they lay on here so that because that is one thing that does get the strawberries. If they lay on the ground for too many days, the roly-polies or the slugs or the earwigs, whatever, they will find them. And so I don't know that that's going to work, but it seemed like a solution that I'd like to try. So I bought a set of those, and we're going to put them on strategically on some of the strawberry plants and see what happens. And as we come this way, you can see this patch really filled in. Like, there's so many strawberry plants here, which is just so exciting because fresh strawberries are like fresh tomatoes. They're just like out of this world. Now this strawberry is a woodland strawberry, Alexandria, and no, Regina. This one's a Regina. I just ordered Alexandria, and they're this little tiny strawberry, and they have the most amazing flavor. Like, we've all agreed that they pretty much taste like sweet tarts, and they're good, and you get strawberries all season. Like, they literally start ripening in June, and we were still eating them in October. And they also were a really beautiful we planted them in a hedge fashion right here, their direction, and it was just this beautiful little border plant, but it had these strawberries, and for some reason, because they never touched the ground, no pests at all found those, and we pretty much got all of the strawberries. So that's pretty exciting. Behind the strawberries, we have a bunch of our blueberries, and they're just starting to bud out. And you want to be careful of those buds because, again, those are the fruit, and the ones that come later will be your foliage. And so you don't want to hit those or bend them or break them off. And then one of the casualties of our early spring was an apricot. And I've desperately wanted apricots, since I've gotten the yard big enough to have fruit trees. And so I planted this just traditional apricot with the idea that I would get to do that. And it has dropped below freezing, 3 nights? And yesterday when I came out, these were encapsulated in solid ice, and you could click on them. And so you can see that they're starting to turn brown, and because the bees aren't out consistently, they won't be pollinated, and so we won't get apricots again. So because of that, I'm going to do the really hard thing, because it's one of those things where it is a beautiful tree. It has a beautiful shape that Isabella's made, but it doesn't have a purpose. It's just, and I have lots of trees that don't have purposes. So we're going to cut it down and plant something else. And I have ordered a couple of hardy apricots that I'm going to espalier on a fence line in the backyard. And so I'm hoping that that's where we can get, some fruit-bearing apricots. And I'm not really sure, we haven't really discussed what's going to go in this place, but it's such a pretty little tree, but we wanted it for its fruit, so we have to not feel guilty or, struggle with, it was a $15 or $20 whip, several years ago. So it's going to get edited out and replaced with something that produces something, probably like plums is what I'll do, because I love plum jam as well. And behind Isabel is a nectarine. And this nectarine was amazing. It produced the first year we planted, and they're so tasty. And it looks like we have a ton of flower buds. And so what we're going to do is we'll wait for them to get pollinated. We'll see where nectarines are growing, much like an apple. And then you will prune away small fruit or fruit that is pressing against each other. And look at this little bud cluster. There's so many jammed right in there. And anyway, so that's how you make sure that you get really good quality fruit, is you don't let all of the fruit ripen. Another thing that we do is we cover, once we have it's about a ½ inch to an inch size fruit, we actually cover them with a little piece of stocking that's clear, and the fruit can stretch and grow inside of that stocking, and then birds don't peck it, things don't find it and chew little holes in it. And that's how we deal with pests with our fruit. We haven't ever sprayed for codling moth or anything like that at this point. Isabel does treat the fruit with copper, just for like fungus and that kind of thing that happens when it gets rainy or, that kind of thing. And there are certain things that happen, especially to like nectarines and peaches, where if you get a borer, and you can really visibly see if you have a borer, because you get this little jelly thing at the base or where a hole is. And I was excuse me, I was thinking that this might be it, but it's not. I think it's just the sap from where this got pruned. And so far so good. We don't have, oh wait, well that might be sap as well from pruning it. But they're really susceptible to borers because they're tasty. And when things are tasty and sweet, everything likes it. Not just people, but bugs as well. And so make sure and read about fruit trees. Make sure and really do your research on what works best in your area, what is the best for your soil, your sun exposure, all of that kind of thing, because it really is important. It's not just a buy it, plant it, and think that you're going to get these amazing Bosch pears, because it does just take time. It takes pruning, it takes education, and so we're here to help. We're here to answer questions if you ever need it. If you need design help, definitely contact us. If you just need plant help, we have a organization called Be Wise Plant Society on Mighty Networks, and we love helping people there as well. And just send us your queries to bewisegardens.com. Well, that's our website, and then you can send us a contact there. And what else do we have coming up? Let's see. Well, I mean, one thing that we're doing is we're developing our design business. I have a couple of other kids that work in the business, and they're like, oh, I'd like to learn how to do that. Like, how do you do the functional parts of drawing and designing? And so that really gave me the idea that I need to do a DIY. Like, you know, whether that's a PDF with some videos in it, and then we're gonna put that also in our website so that you can find out how you can design this kind of thing yourself. Because there are just a few techniques, and we talked to a client yesterday, and I fall prey to it all the time. You're at the store, there's like 5 of something that you think you've always wanted. You're like, I'm gonna buy those. And you get them home, and you're like, oh no, where do I put it? And especially right now, you think, I have a hole right there. I'm gonna plant it right there. Oh, I have another hole, I'm gonna plant it right there. Well, then things fill in, and it looks like what you've done. You've done something very sporadically or spontaneously, and then that's the way your garden kind of looks. And the reason it looks like that is because you didn't sketch something out, design it, space things according to mature sizing. And like this with these trees, these were planted specifically so that they will be able to grow in their space without crowding the next tree. They're all trying to share resources, water, nutrients in the soil, sun. And so you never want to cram things too closely. Yet in this kind of garden, which is a cottage style garden, eventually things get so mature, like out there, where you can see everything is growing right next to each other, right? But nothing is growing through each other. And so you don't want things like branches to cross, which they then rub and can cause stress, or an entry point for disease or a pest. And so when you do a garden plan, then you can hold yourself accountable to, oh, this space only holds 5 plants, or this space only holds 20 plants. When it's done, I'm gonna stop planting things in there. So I'm gonna come up with a PDF. Isabel and I will develop that, and just for the person who wants to do it themselves and learn how to do it and have some fun with their garden. I hope everybody has a great spring, and just don't plant too soon. May 7th.